Alright, hello again. This is Jeff Scott, and I've been starting to come talk to you about HTML5 and CSS3, courtesy of Murox HTML5 and CSS3 3rd edition. It's time for us to get started and to get into Chapter 1. So what I have in front of you here are the PowerPoint presentations for Chapter 1. Alright, so here's our objectives. We should learn to load a web page from the internet or an intranet into a web browser. Second, view the source code for a web page in a web browser. Let's do that first before we even do anything. So if I bring up a browser, mine came up to the Blackhawk homepage, but if I come in, for example, and I type in CNN.com, I can also type in, if I want to, http://www.cnn.com. Alright. And you can see the page. So we've already done that. Now, if you wanted to know the actual HTML, the actual hypertext markup language, and the actual JavaScript that made up this page, in order to be able to tell, you take your mouse and you put it in some blank area on the screen. You really don't have to, but I always try to. And you right mouse click and you choose View Page Source. Now that's all the code that made up this website. Now chances are with most of you, if you took a look through it, you probably could understand very little to none of it, and that's to be expected. Now not all of that was actually keyed in either. Some of that is created automatically for you. So we've already loaded the web page in from the internet and viewed its source code. We want to describe the components of a web application, differentiate between the internet and intranet, describe what are known as Hypertext Transfer Protocol or HTTP requests and responses, distinguish between the way a web server processes a static web page versus the way it processes a dynamic web page, name the 5 major web browsers, describe the use of JavaScript, distinguish between HTML and CSS, explain how to deploy a website on the internet, describe the components of an HTTP URL, and describe web development, usability, cross-browser compatibility, user accessibility, search engine optimization, and responsive web design. Well, to make a long story short, this is an overview chapter. So they're going to present a lot of topics that will be presented later in the book in much more depth and breadth of coverage. That's the first thing. Second thing, I believe that everybody can get this stuff. I really and truly do. All right? If I go into Google, and you can see I'm here, and if you don't know how to, it's www.google.com or just google.com should work too. All right? So if I type in, for example, let's say I wanted to learn HTML5 on my own. So I type in HTML5 tutorial as an example. The system comes back with 17,400,000 hits. And it just works out nice that the first one that comes up is from a thing that's called W3 Schools. Don't have to worry about it about what W3 Schools is, means, etc. right now. Oops. But what I do want you to know is W3 stands for the World Wide Web Consortium, and it's something that will be discussed later on in the book. Okay, there we go. It's going to be too big. All right, so if you go out to here, what you're going to find is a very nice tutorial on HTML5. That very nice tutorial is actually presented by the World Wide Web Consortium. All right, it's very well done. It has a lot of code examples that they actually recommend that you take, use, and if you can, implement them into your own web page. So you can go out, you can find literally hundreds of sites that are very good out there on the internet. But this is one that I think is good. All right. Not only does w3schools.com, not only do they have a nice HTML tutorial, but they have a nice CSS tutorial as well. which is right here. So if you want to start learning, or you're not satisfied with what you're getting on the tapes and in the classroom, etc., and you want to do some learning on your own, maybe you just want to challenge yourself, etc., go ahead, move ahead, etc., you can do that. And just so you know, there's also here a very nice JavaScript tutorial, which isn't discussed till toward the end of the class, but just so you know. So you'll notice with all three of these sites, they're all http://www.w3schools.com, the World Wide Web Consortium. And there's an HTML portion, a CSS portion, and a JavaScript portion. If you just literally type into your browser nothing but w3schools.com, if that's all you put into your browser and you hit enter, you're going to get to the home page. And then you'll notice once you're at the home page, you can go to here, or, which might be even easier for you, is just go down to tutorials. Click the tutorials button. That's the Learn HTML that I showed you. That's the Learn CSS that I showed you. That's the Learn JavaScript. And if you want, they even have a jQuery tutorial. So we'll put that one in there also. So again, definitely not the only sites out there, but they're very good sites. Each and every one of these comes highly recommended. Now, I'll save that later. Okay. The other thing too, the other question that I oftentimes get asked by people is, okay, am I going to have to do a lot of work outside of class? And the answer, it sounds very political, I guess it is it depends. All right. Some people are going to be able to have enough time in class to probably get the majority of their work done. Other people might struggle, might have to watch the tapes over and over again, etc. I really and truly do believe that everyone can get this. It takes some people longer than others. I always remember the first actual programming class that I took was at the University of Wisconsin Extension, Marathon County in Wausau, Wisconsin. And it was the summer of, I don't know, must have been about 1980, something like that. Okay. And so what are we talking about? 35 years ago, 36 years ago, whatever. And the guy talked for the whole class period. He talked about what computers were, what computers could do. He talked to us about the lab that was available on campus, what our homework was going to be, etc. And then he talked about what our first assignment was. And this was a class in a programming language that's not used much anymore today, but it's called Fortran, short for formula translation. And long story short, he talked about it and he gave us an exam. And he wanted us to write a program where you entered one number, which was your start number, you entered another number, which was your end number, and you generated a list of prime numbers. Prime number, a number that's only divisible by itself in 1. So if I put in 1 in 10,000, that would give me all the prime numbers between 1 and 10,000. All right. So the class met for 2 hours. He kept us about an hour, and he said, you know what, it's the first day, I'm going to let you go. So I was walking out, and this was not the school I was going to. I was going to a technical college out in Wausau, but I saw this class was open, and I decided to sign up for it to get some more programming practice. Okay. So the people are walking out, and I hear a lot of them laughing and stuff, and I heard a couple of them saying, man, this is going to be an easy assignment. I'm going to have it done in 10 or 15 minutes. And all I kept thinking is, what the hell is a prime number? Because I had no idea. So unlike the rest of the class, I walked over to the library. This was, it was years ago, because we're talking 35 plus years ago. I went to the card catalog, and I tried to look up prime number, and I really didn't find much stuff, but I knew it was a mathematical term. So I went and looked for the books that were in the mathematical section. All right, eventually I found out what a prime number was. That was not an easy program for me to do, but I did it. If you'd have told me then, while I was sitting there doing that I would be teaching this stuff to people now, I not only would have laughed at you, I would have bet you every penny that I had that there's no way in heck that was going to happen. So, again, will you need to work outside of class? It depends on the person. All right, so let's look I am now on page 5. This is the picture that's on page 5 of your book. These are the components of a web application. Now this has changed over the last 5 to 10 years. It used to be that everything you see here, here, and here, not the web server, not this, but the desktop computer, the tablet, and the smartphone, those used to always all just say computer, computer, computer. But we're in the age of mobile. So when you create a web application, you must consider mobile. In fact, by the end of 2015, so by the end of last year, not the year we're in, but last year, more people are actually accessing the internet using mobile devices, which are defined typically to be tablets and smartphones, than they are using desktop and laptop computers. All right? So everything you see here that says desktop or tablet or smartphone, these three things, they're known as clients. And they want to go and they want to get out to the internet and do something. So they type in, they want to know about Blackhawk Technical College. So they type in blackhawk.edu and they hit enter. Their message goes over the internet using what's called a hypertext transfer protocol, or HTTP request. One of the servers at Blackhawk gets that request and sends back information in hypertext markup language, but where it received the HTTP or hypertext transfer protocol request, it sends back through the internet and then to the appropriate machine an HTTP response. All right? The internet is really just a big collection. Okay, it's just a big collection of computers. Now, you'll notice in here they talk about LANs, and there's even a couple things in there that say WANs. All right? A LAN is a local area network. All of the computers in room 1509 at Blackhawk are literally linked together to one another. All right? When you have basically a physical connection like that, it's a local area network, and it's local because it's usually in the same room or the same building or whatever. You'll notice there's other things there that say WAN. Well, there is a connection between the computers at the Blackhawk Technical College in Janesville and the Blackhawk Technical College in Monroe, but it's not a physical connection because it would cost too much money to run wires underground or under the road or whatever from those. So with a wide area network, you connect these things using something that's called a router. And they route information from one network to another. You don't have to worry about these. These are hardware terms, but I'm just trying to at least introduce them to you. So your web app has clients. It has a web server or servers, and it has a network. The clients use a browser to request web pages from a server. All right, the local area network is something that's typically physically located in the same proximity, whereas a wide area network, they're connected via routers, so there's no physical connection. The internet consists of a lot of wide area networks connected at what are called IXPs, or Internet Exchange Points. Those are the IXPs that you see right there. In addition, you can have something that's called an ISP, which is an Internet Service Provider. And they own, typically, these wide area networks, and they lease access to it. So, for instance, I have an account with Charter. Charter is my ISP, not for my Blackhawk stuff, but for my own personal stuff. All right, here's a static web page. More than anything else, I want you to get this in your mind. A static web page has to end with either .html or .htm. Back in the day, like in the 90s, when you put an extension on something, the last thing after the period, it could only be 3 letters. So for a while, .html files were called .htm files. Now they're referred to as .html files. But a static page is one that's stored on a web server and typically doesn't change. In order to change it, the web developer must come in and physically change it. When the user requests a static web page, the browser still sends the HTTP request to the web server. When the server receives it, It retrieves the associated HTML and sends it back as an HTTP response. And then it gets what's called rendered in the browser. And that's all fine and dandy, but today people want dynamicity. In other words, I need my bells and whistles. I don't want to go out to a site and have it always look like this. If nothing else, I want to see these people going down on this roller coaster or whatever. All right? There's an example. You go out to Amazon. You can get a web page that can actually physically change. So a dynamic web page does not have .html on the end. Rather, it has something like .php, which is a programming language, .aspx and ASP.NET is a programming language, .jsp and Java is a programming language. But the point is, it's what's referred to as a server-side program. HTML is a client-side program, all right, and dynamic web pages go through a server-side program. Here, when the web server receives the request, it looks and it says, "Oh, you're a .php you're something that's got to be answered through PHP." So it sends it off to a PHP server. Then it gets a different request and it says, "Oh, you're something that has to go through ASP.NET." So it sends it off to an ASP.NET server. All right? Or in the case of Amazon, quite often if you want to order something or you want to check on an order or if you want to check on availability of a book or whatever, it's got to take your request and send it out to what's called a database server. All right. Still, when the application server finishes processing the data, so you'll notice in here there can be many servers involved. It still generates the HTML for the web page. It still returns it to the web server. From the web server back to the browser. All right. So here's probably your 5 major browsers right now. Used to be when you showed this, there was Internet Explorer and everyone else. Then there was Internet Explorer and Firefox and everyone else. Now Chrome has pretty much overtaken IE and Firefox. Safari is still important because Safari is the default browser that you get on any kind of Mac, Macintosh, iOS, iPhone, iPad, whatever device. And Opera is another browser that's been around for a long time. All of these browsers, all of them should work on all major operating systems. So Windows, Mac, or Apple, whatever you want to call it, and Unix, sometimes called Starnix or Linux type of systems. Now I mentioned server-side languages before, and some of the major server-side languages include ASP.NET, which is a Microsoft product, JSP, which is Java Server Pages, PHP, which is open source, meaning it's basically anybody can use it for free, Cold Fusion, Ruby, Perl, and Python. The 2 that we go into in the program, the IT Web Software Developer Program at Blackhawk, are the first and third. In other words, ASP.NET and PHP. All right. Now, it says here a web page with image swaps and rollover. Perhaps you've gone out to a site before where if you take your mouse and you move it over something on the site, it changes. A real good example of that, one that I've seen before, is you go out to a website for some kind of a dietary product. And they've got before and after pictures. So they've got a picture of someone, you take your mouse and you put it over them, and either they shrink, they expand, or they contract type of an idea. All right. Well, to do all that stuff, you could do it in PHP or in ASP.NET, but that's something that you really don't need to make the server do. If there's something simple that can be done on the client side, you typically do it on the client side, and you do that using JavaScript, which again we talk about much later in the course. Some of the common uses for JavaScript include validating data. So it makes sure that if it asks you, for example, your age, you can't leave it blank or you can't put something non-numeric in. Image wraps, swaps, and rollovers that I just mentioned to you. And accordions. If you've ever seen a frequently asked question page, you don't know what I mean, you're going to end up building them during your tenure here, so don't worry about it. JavaScript, unlike ASP.NET or PHP or JSP, JavaScript is a client-side language. When the browser requests an HTML page with JavaScript, all right, both the HTML and the JavaScript are loaded into the browser. And because JavaScript runs on the client and not the server, it provides certain functionality that that it can run, and it doesn't have to be sent back to the server. So this can make your application run faster and more, just more efficiently. So that's how JavaScript fits into this. So what are we going to be doing in this class? Writing code that looks like this. All right, I'm actually, just to show you this. Now, I wouldn't typically do it like this, but I am going to. All right, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to grab all of this code that's in here right now. It's actual code. And I'm going to copy it. The textbook that we use recommends that you download an editor that's called Aptana. And you can do that if you want, but I'm just going to use a real simple editor that's called Notepad++. If you've ever used Notepad, it's kind of like Notepad on steroids, for lack of better words. All right, now I'm not going to go over what any of this stuff means, because that's what the class is about. But I will show you how I think, because I don't think the author did a very good job here of setting this up. So this is how I would set it up. Again, please don't let any of this stuff throw you, because all the stuff that's in here, all of it, we're going to end up going over. All right, we're going to end up going over all of it as the semester goes on. All right, now I'm going to get an error message when I try to run this, and I will show you what the error message is and why we get it in just a minute. But all I'm trying to do is show you how I kind of dole things out on the page here to make them easier to read. You may or may not agree with the way that I'm doing this. If you agree with it and you want to use my style, more power to you. If you disagree and you want to use your own style, more power to you. Two or three more lines. All right, I'm going to get an error when I try to run this, and the error is I don't have this thing that's called dreamweaverbook.jpg. All right, so mine's going to look a little funky on the page, but I'm going to save this right to my desktop, and I'm going to call it index.html. Now, if the machine beeps at me, it means I've already got a file named index. It didn't. So you can see how some color coding took in here. See that? Now when I run this, this is what it looks like. Okay? Not really a whole heck of a lot. All right? In fact, if you look in your book, they want you, after you put in this code, they want it to look like this. And you say, well, ours doesn't. Well, I already told you don't have the picture. All right? But what they've done in their copy of this file is they're using something that's referred to as CSS, or cascading style sheets, to make it look nicer on the page. You're going to learn all that stuff as we go on. All right. And they're using a style sheet that's called book.css. Well, I don't have that style sheet, and I don't know where to get that style sheet, to be honest with you. In fact, I shouldn't say that. If I go and look out on the P drive, you know the drill, or you're starting to know it. CIS 152 157 WD fall 2016 source code book apps. go to Chapter 1, there's book.css. So there it is. So I'm going to grab that and drag it over. So I'm going to copy it there. And there's the Dreamweaver book JPEG that we need. So I'm going to copy that there. So now I have all the information that I need. In fact, watch what happens when I refresh the screen. It doesn't look like it, but as soon as I click this button to refresh, now it looks pretty much just like it does in the textbook. Now their screen size is a little smaller, so theirs looks more about like that. But you can see that with making very few changes, just exactly what I did. Now, I do want to mention one thing to you. I'm going to take this file and close it. That I want you to get used to from day one is creating a folder. So this one I'm going to call, for example, CH01. And I'm going to literally just go and drag those files in here and say move them here. Now if I did that too fast and you say, I don't know how you made a folder, I right mouse clicked in an empty area, chose new and folder. Alright, so there's my stuff. I run it. There's the file. Okay. Now they show you a few things here, and they're saying, okay, what we want to do, let me just open up both of those files. Now notice I can open up this one, the book CSS, and I can open up the HTML. And I've got them both highlighted. I'm right mouse clicking and I'm choosing Edit with Notepad++. And I'm going to explain what all that stuff means and all this stuff means in just a second. But if I try to open the picture in an editor like this, I'm using a text editor and I'm trying to open up a non-text file with a text editor. So it looks like this. All right, if you've ever done that before, if you've ever tried to open up something and it looks really funky or weird like that, that's usually what it is. All right, let's go through this file first. Again, I try to pretty mine up a little bit, and as mentioned, you may or may not agree with my styling, and that's okay. All right, in English, this says everything, unless I tell it otherwise, everything in the body, so everything that appears on my web page, I want you to look, it's telling the system this. And if you have a font that's called Arial, I want you to use that as the default font. All right, and that's just basically, the font is just the text style. If you don't have Arial, try to find Helvetica, which is another type of font. If you can't find Helvetica, use sans serif, which basically every computer has a sans serif font of one type or other. My font size, I want it to be as big, the regular default, so make it 100%. The width of my screen should be 550 pixels. Notice what happens now. Notice when I run this. Okay, when I do a run, and I like to run mine in Chrome. You see how it looks. Everybody sees that. But I'm going to come back here now, and in this file, I'm going to change it from 550 pixels to 250 pixels to the width. All right. Then I'm going to take this and refresh the page. And it's not changing. Oh, I think I know why. I do know why. Because I have to add that file in here. So I have to say this. Link rel equals style sheet href equals book.css. Whoopsie. And save this. Now watch what happens when I refresh the screen. Ready? Oh, come on. Don't make me a liar. How about this? Book in the double quotes. Now let's try it. Alright, see how much narrower it got? Because I said I wanted the size of my screen. I shrunk it from 550, what are called pixels, to 250. Notice if I come back in here and let's set it at like 400. Not 4,000. 400 pixels. Now watch how it expands. That should be pretty obvious what's going on in there. So I can really change the way, the perception, what this looks like based on what I'm doing here. All right, it was supposed to be set to 550. So I'll set it back to there, and there you go. Okay? Now, we're going to have whole chapters, whole entire chapters on HTML and on CSS. This is just designed to get you started. That's all. So we're saying we want the width to be that size. When you put this in here, margin 0 auto, which is confusing to a lot of people. Literally what it means is center whatever's in the body of my web page, center it on the page. In later chapters, we're going to go over padding, and we'll talk about padding and margin. All right, so you'll see them, but this says to add what's called 1M of padding, and this says put a 1 pixel solid navy border around this whole thing. Well, that is this thing right here. Okay. All right. Then it says anytime we have an H1 tag. What the heck is an H1 tag? That literally is this right here. You'll see it in just a minute. But for that H1 tag, this says no margin on it, but add a little bit of padding. Make it 200%, so double its normal size, and give it a color of navy. This next thing says if I have an image, move it over to the left as far as you can. Finally, for my text, it says here margin 0, which means give me no margin, but give me a little bit of padding on the bottom. Notice if I take where I've got 0.5 right there, I'm going to take that same thing and I'm going to put it here by margin, 0.5 m. Okay? And then you look at it and you go, it didn't change. Wait till I refresh the browser. All right? You may or may not have noticed, but it just moved a little bit. All right? So what CSS is, cascading style sheets rather, what this is this works with the presentation of your web page. You're going to do a lot of CSS while you're in the program here. All right, here's the other file. At the top here, this is referred to as a doc type designation. It used to be, not too long ago, you had to write a whole boatload of stuff here for this. But now with HTML5, this is what you have to write. And you can write the word doc type in lowercase or uppercase. You'll see it in both. And you need the exclamation point on there too. HTML, which is what this is, HTML is known as a tag-based language. So here's my beginning HTML tag, there's my ending HTML tag. My beginning head tag, my ending head tag. Beginning title, ending title. Beginning, this is a self-closing tag, the meta and the link. Beginning H1, ending H1. Beginning P, ending P. Beginning P, ending P. Beginning body tag, ending body tag. All right? So this is a tag-centered language. If I go back out to the site I told you about before, W3 Schools, in fact, what I'm going to do is search for something that I know is somewhere out on W3 Schools, but I'm going to type in here HTML tag list. All right, HTML lists, HTML tags, that's what I want. All right. You can go through this yourselves, but there's somewhere in the neighborhood, I believe, of around 100 of these tags, more or less. All right? And those tags that you saw in here, that's what makes up the hypertext markup language. All right? So if you go out to w3schools.com/tags, you'll find it. Okay? And these tags each have their own job. Here's the doc type tag that I showed you before. Here's the HTML tag. These are all tags that you'll see in the example that we're going through. All right? So this is our HTML tag. This is what's called an attribute. All right? And this is the value of the attribute. This says the language we're using is English. So if you think about it, if for example, if here I had my name, then here I might have height equals 72, type of an idea. All right? Then after this HTML, so you have a doc type tag at the beginning and an HTML tag that follows it. The next tag is what's called a head tag. Everything in this head section, so everything between here and here, none of that appears on the web page. This says that we're using what's called a standard character set, which we'll go over in a later chapter. It's called a meta tag. This says Dreamweaver book is what should appear when we run this in the tab up here. See how it says Dreamweaver book? In fact, if I change that, and I'll just change it from Dreamweaver book to a Dreamweaver text as an example, just so you see that. And if I go back and refresh by clicking this arrow, now it's going to, it should change. That's the one I have to refresh. A Dreamweaver text. There you see it. All right. There's so much stuff to show you, and it can be very overwhelming. So if this is overwhelming you, please don't let it. All right. This says we want to add our style sheet, that other file that I just showed you. So we want to link it to the page that we have. The relationship is what we're linking is a style sheet. And this says basically that it's located in the same area that my HTML file is, and it's called book.css. All right. Then we have the body. Everything that you see in the body here, that's all the stuff that does appear on the web page. So we had that H1 tag, if you remember that from before, that's what we said was going to be navy, and 200%, etc. So that's a tag. There are 6 different types of H tags. We'll talk about those later. This says we want to add an image. The image is dreamweaverbook.jpg, so that's what's called our image source. And just in case we spell it wrong or somebody doesn't have, let's say someone is blind, it's not going to help to show a picture of a book. So the alt text is alternative text. So if they're using something that reads to them, it'll be able to say it's a picture of a Dreamweaver book. All right. That's a beginning paragraph tag, an ending paragraph tag, beginning and end. This is just text. So what you see here, since 1996, Dreamweaver has been, that's all this stuff in here and in here. All right. And finally, if you look in here, notice that it says read more, and this is what's called here an anchor tag. Don't worry about it for right now, but it's one of those things, if you've ever clicked a hyperlink, see how it says read more ... here? Where'd they get that? From right here. And we're not telling it to go anywhere, and that's why you can click on it and nothing happens. So that was very quick, but I just explained to you everything on that web page. So I went over this. All right, we'll leave it right there then. I believe that HTML1 was actually released somewhere around 1985 to 88, somewhere in there. So it's somewhere in the area of 30 years old. The newest HTML, according to this, is HTML 5.1, which I didn't even know was out, but the one that we're using basically in here is HTML5. It's gotten progressively better with more features and more functionality. All right. Not every browser supports the newest version of CSS, which is CSS3, and we'll talk about that again as we go on. All right. 2 websites you should be familiar with, they mention here, are the w3.org. That's that W3 Schools that I mentioned. They're a subsidiary of this. And I'm trying to get you out there, but for some reason it doesn't want to let me. There we go. All right, we'll do it from in here. That's fine. I will just tell you, and you may think I'm trying to be funny. I don't think this is funny. This is a great site. It's the first time I ever remember going out to the site and seeing a picture on it. But this is a great site if you're tired and you want to be able to go to sleep, because w3c.org is written by a lot of technical people, and there's a lot of really good information in it, but it's very technical information that you may or may not be interested in. All right. The other site they mention is what's called the WATWG, which is the Web Hypertext Application Technology Working Group. And again, you might look at all that and say, okay, fine. Do I have to know this stuff? You know, basically, do I have to? And the answer is no. It's just a little bit of historical perspective for you. And I'm going to give you a very, very quick chronology. What happened was in the 80s, they came up with HTML so that computers could talk to one another over the internet. All right. Over time, people thought that HTML had outlived its usefulness, so groups got together and tried to come up with a new language that didn't have those tags that I showed you before, but where you could create your own tags. That language was called XML, the Extensible Markup Language. It's still in use today, but it was never really became as popular as people thought it would. So, the World Wide Web Consortium and the WATWG separately started to make changes to HTML to bring it back into vogue, so to speak. Then they realized what they were both doing, so they decided to work together. And that's pretty much how we came up with HTML5. That's a lot more than you need to know, but I'm just telling it to you so at least you've heard it. All right, again, the author recommends that you use a product called Aptana Studio when you're working with this stuff. You can. In fact, they even mention in the back of the book, let's see, in Appendix A, I believe it is, on page 658, 659, they show you how you can install Aptana Studio 3 for free on your machine. So that's one of the many text editors. We will have brackets on the system. We will have Notepad++ on the system, and I believe TextMate is for Mac, an Apple machine. You can also use a product like Adobe Dreamweaver, all right, and it'll do a lot of work for you. We don't have that at the school here, though. What are called popular IDEs for web development. An IDE is literally what's referred to as an integrated development environment. It's kind of like using Notepad++ on steroids. So it provides a lot of stuff for you. During your time here, you will use Microsoft Visual Studio IDE, you will use the Eclipse IDE, you will use the Android Studio IDE, and you will use what's called the Xcode IDE. All right? When you want to take files that you've been working on your own machine, which is called a local machine, and if you do that, everything that we do here, you're going to be able to run. But let's say that you created a website and you think, this is really good. I'd love to put it out on the internet. Well, then you have to take the files that you've created and you have to copy them, transfer them to one of those servers that we talked about. And FileZilla is a package that you can use to do that. All right, that's enough for right now. When you transfer files, okay, as it says, you typically use what's called FTP, or the File Transfer Protocol. And here are some popular FTP programs. All right. I don't know if you've ever looked at something like this before or not, but if you've ever typed in a URL that looks like this, and I tried it, this one doesn't go anywhere, it's mythical. But as you can see there, if you typed all of that in, the http:// is referred to as a protocol. And in fact, it stands for the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. You may have seen it where you go out to a site, and if you're using for example, if you're using like an e-commerce site where you've got it, where you're checking out or something, it might change from HTTP:/ to HTTPS:// which means that you're doing it over a secure connection. If you're using one of those FTP things, then this will be replaced here with FTP. What comes next is what's referred to as the domain name. So if I were to buy jeffscott.com, my domain name would end up being www.jeffscott.com. All right? Most of us are used to just typing in something for this, like just modulemedia.com. Okay? If you type that in, just for a second, pretend this path isn't there and this file name isn't there. So if you just type in by itself modulemedia.com, the system is going to look, if you do that, let me put this up here. I have to make that smaller, sorry about that. But if I just come in and type just this, in fact, let's say I type in the HTTP:/ www.modulemedia.com. Then what happens is the system looks and says, oh, do you have a file on there that's called index.html? And if it finds it, that's the file that'll come up. Oh, you don't have that? Do you have one that's called index.htm? And if it finds it, it puts that file up. Oh, you don't have that? Then it looks for a file called default.html. And if it doesn't find that, it looks for a default.htm. All right? And if it doesn't find that, it says, oh, then this must not be a static web page. So it looks and sees, okay, do you have a file called index.php? Or you have a file called index.aspx? Or maybe a default.php, an index.aspx, or a default.aspx, or an index.jsp, or a default. So it looks for all these things. And only when it looks through its whole list, and if it can't find anything, does it come back with an error. All right? But we put a path in here. So in other words, there's a folder underneath here that's called our work. Now, what should happen is if we just type in http:/ www.modulemedia.com/our work, it should by default bring up the index.html file. All right, that's what I was trying to get across to you. All right, so here's the web page that you should get when you do this. Now, I tried putting this in. It didn't like it. I could try it again. Maybe I typed it wrong or something, but I don't believe that it, at least that it put it in there. So, oops, already showed you that one. So let's go into this modulemedia.com. Again, am I spelling it right? Module, it sure looks like it. So there's modulemedia.com. That's good. It does look like it does in the book. Okay, that's good. So let's keep going. What's next then? Our work. / our work. Okay, well, it found it. Now, it didn't the other day when I did this, so I don't know what's going on. All right? But if I type in at the end of this, which I can do, index.html, that doesn't change. I get the same page. Okay? All right. This lecture is getting to be a lot longer than I thought it would be, so, but that's okay. Again, this is if you omit the parts. I've already mentioned some of that stuff to you. 2 ways to access a page on the internet: enter the URL or click a hyperlink to get there. 2 ways to access a web page on your own computer: you do file open. There's a lot of ways that you can do it. They're just showing you some of them. All right. Kind of important that you see this right here. It says naming conventions for folders and files. Let's get right to it. Anything that you create in this program, file names, variable names, whatever, unless you're told otherwise, you're best off making them lowercase and use only letters, not even numbers, not underscores, not hyphens. Okay? And you'll see this again and again as we go on. But don't have blank spaces, especially. The HTML source code for the module media page. Well, if you remember, when we get out here, we can right mouse click and choose web page source. So what they're showing you right there is what's right here. All right, I just showed you how to view the source for the web page. It says here a website that's easy to use. And this is starting on page 30 in your book. All right. Websites should be designed for a user. All right. You should make sure that the website, that people can find what they're looking for and they can get there as quickly as possible. They can get in, they can get out. You want information. No information overload. Just give them the information they need. You want it to be as simple as possible. Most of them are going to be able to look at the page and know right away what they want. You should make them click as few links or whatever, buttons or whatever as possible. Present as much information as you can near the top. Group related items. Include headings that identify the site and provide navigation. Use, current navigation type of facilities. So usability, what it means here, it's how easy is it to use a website. Usability is critical. Again, users want to find what they're looking for as quickly and easily as possible to get the information and do their task. Get in, get out, like I mentioned. All right, where they say above the fold, that's the old idea of the old newspaper days, where you fold a newspaper in half and the most important stuff is on the top half. All right. Current browsers, this is old. All right. Everyone has their own likes and dislikes over what's the best browser. And in the end, not to be funny or mean or anything else, it really doesn't matter. You should use whatever browser you're comfortable with. All right. For cross-browser compatibility, what that means is I want my website, whether I'm looking at it on Internet Explorer or Google Chrome or Safari or Firefox or Opera or something else, I want it to look the same on all sites. So I should test it in a variety of browsers and even in different versions of browsers. I should try to use the most up-to-date features, but realize that I might have to put in workarounds because some older browsers might not be able to test that stuff. All right. Sometimes there's a problem. Well, 3% of the world might still be using IE6, but I can't get a version of that. Yes, you can. There are emulation tools and stuff out there that you can use. Articles on web accessibility. The idea with accessibility, you want to make your website accessible to everyone, especially people who are challenged in a physical or other way. As you go through this book, it's filled with different guidelines for coding elements and attributes to provide accessibility. Some of the things with accessibility you might want to be aware of. The ADA is the big one, the American Disability Act. And people can have different kinds of disabilities. Someone can be blind, totally blind, legally blind, totally deaf, partially deaf. They could have motor problems where they can't use a mouse. They can have cognitive types of problems where maybe they have very little short-term memory. If you want more information about some of this stuff, you can go and take a look right here. Finally, search engine optimization. What that means is what everyone wants is that let's say that I'm going to open up a new sporting goods store, Jeff's Sporting Goods. What I want to have happen is after I create my website and it goes out to Google and they put it out there, when somebody types in sporting goods, of course, I want mine to be on top. All right? And in order to do that, I've got to meet certain rules, because Google is an example of a search engine, and I want to optimize my site to make it as easy as possible for Google to be able to use it. All right, we'll talk much more about search engine optimization when we go on. Google, Yahoo, and Bing are the best. There might still be Jeeves. I don't know. There might be other ones too. Muroc Books website on different devices. There it is. All right, on probably a tablet. There it is on a phone. Finally, responsive website design. If you've never heard of that term before, I'll show you quickly what a responsive website should look like. All right, as we are finished with the first chapter. So let me go back to here and oh, it's in here. This is a responsive website. It's very simple, not a whole lot in it, but notice what happens when I take the site and I make it smaller. See that? See what it's doing? This is as narrow as my browser can go. That's emulating or simulating showing this on a phone. See how everything still looks nice? And I can still even get to all my menu options here. That's responsive design that allows you to do that. So our author says for responsive design, and this is the last slide in this chapter. Responsive design refers to websites designed to adapt gracefully to screen size. Typically, the overall look and feel of a site remains the same regardless of the media that you're using to look at it. Some of the things you do with that to make that happen: flexible layouts, scalable images, and media queries. All things you learn about starting really in this class. So I finished with Chapter 1. I don't want to save. I'm going to come back next, and as you might guess, I'm going to go into Chapter 2. And Chapter 2 is how to code, test, and validate a web page. So I'll be back with that one shortly.